recording here. All righty. Yeah, it looks a little, besides Pam and Hannah. Yeah, she's probably going to be recording them for a little bit. The doctor wants her to get plenty of rest while she gets over this, so she's getting the recordings for now. Okay. All right, well, let's pray, and we'll get started. Thank you, Lord, for the privilege of looking at some passages this morning that deal with the issue of particularism and universalism, and then moving into the issue of expressiveness. And we pray that you'd be honored as we consider all these in light of the revelation of your truth to us. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, you never know when you pray who's going to show up. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. So, there is no article report today. Nina will be on Thursday. All right. So let's just look at some passages that have to do with the issue of particularism and universalism. Are the rules the same for everybody? Okay, and it's this passage here needs to be understood in light of this word right here, partiality. What does that mean? And by the way, anybody know who spoke this? Book of Acts 10 there. Any idea where this took place or who said this? Yeah, Peter. And where is he? Anybody want to take a stab at that? That's after that. He had the roof thing first, and then he goes to Cornelius, house of Cornelius. And this is the very first thing when he meets the big group. He says, truly I understand that God shows no partiality. Now, why does he say that? What is it about the vision that he had that provokes him to make that statement? The vision of the sheet coming down with all the different animals on it, how does that relate to his statement here? Yeah. Okay, so what you're doing correctly, Graceland, is you are qualifying this word, partiality, based on the context of the narrative. In other words, if you just read this and say, well, God treats everybody the same way in everything, well, just look around. God doesn't, even among his people, he doesn't do that. But the point is, nobody has an inside with God just because he's Jew or Gentile, or whatever. Everyone comes to faith in Christ on the same grounds. Okay, so that's important. All right. So, God treats everybody the same way. No, he doesn't. I mean, when it comes to a way that you enter into a relationship with him, yes, it's by faith in the same person, the Lord Jesus Christ. So look at the 10 Commandments with me here, and you guys know them all very well. Is it possible for God to break his own rules? And I say, that's a dangerous question. Well, I've asked it for a reason. Because in Leviticus, God himself very specifically said if a man commits adultery, he's to be put to death. Right? Did you ever stop to think how many penalties there are in the Old Testament that result in death? I mean, even speaking back to your mom and dad, now it might not be quite that simple, but here, whoever takes a human life will certainly be put to death. These are God's rules, okay? And then in 2 Samuel, Nathan says to David, you'll not die, after David confesses his sins. Wait a minute, David committed adultery, and David took a human life. 2 rules, 2 laws that are punishable by death. And they're not just options, they're commands to put him to death. And then God tells David, you're not going to die on either account. So, is God showing partiality? Is he being a universalist or particularist in this situation? Yeah, I feel like this is a hard one to answer. Liz? Okay. Okay, so even when you read these two, it's not impossible in the larger biblical context to understand that there may be situations in which God himself chooses to show mercy. By the way, these commands here have to do with the way man relates to man, right? And so in giving these commands, God is not saying, I, the giver of the law, am bound to the same limitations you are. Does that make sense? In other words, God, as the giver of the law, has the right in situations that he perceives, that he knows to be legitimate, not to carry that out. Right? I mean, how else are you going to deal with this? That makes sense? And somebody, I was teaching this in Sunday school, and one of the guys raised his hand, and he said, actually, even in this case, the death had to occur. But God knew that ultimately the Lord Jesus Christ would be the one to take that penalty. So even in this case, David's sin, this penalty was carried out, but ultimately in the person of Jesus Christ. That was worth mentioning. Yeah. It's good for you to have to deal with these sorts of things, you know, because people will bring these up sometimes. Why did God not kill David? I'll give you another one. Remember this? David and Bathsheba, we know that one really well. Ahab and Naboth's vineyard. Remember, Naboth wanted, Ahab the king, this is after David, wanted Naboth's vineyard. And he cried about it, he whined about it, and his wife says, what are you crying and whining about? You're the king of Israel, you can do whatever you want. She sent guys out to kill Naboth, and then said, there, he's gone, now the vineyard's yours. Okay? So, in both of these situations, David and Bathsheba and Ahab, did both covet what was not theirs? Absolutely. Did both murder to get it? Well, Jezebel kind of did the job for him, you know. But murder was definitely involved in getting what he wanted and what he wanted. Did both die for their sin? No. So, I think one of the things that's hard for us is we want to see everything black and white. We want to see things spelled out very clearly and objectively. And sometimes there are things under the surface that only God perceives, things that God is doing, that may not be immediately evident to the onlooker, the human onlooker. And I'm not telling you that, you know, because to take this with you and say, well, I can bend this rule here at faith and that rule, and have, you know, I can get away with it, because don't go doing that. In both cases, God is the one. I mean, who killed Ahab, or you know, as a result of this? Well, he didn't die that day, but he ultimately lost his life partly because of that. He was killed. Okay. So again, I'm not trying to open up permission. These are cases where God is overruling in a situation. He is acting as the lawgiver on behalf of these individuals. But even in these cases, the ultimate death of the Lord Jesus Christ has to take place to satisfy the justice of God. All right. I'm not trying to answer all the curiosities about this. I'm just simply trying to point out that sometimes we encounter things like this. Herod's birthday. Now, here's a case where, because of his oath, he made an oath to his guests. Actually, it says because of his oaths, you know, his promise that he had to do this. I'm wondering, is it really so much because of the promise he made or because of his own reputation? Of course, I think the answer to that is it's not the oath itself that he's so loyal to, but his own reputation before all of his important guests who are there. Okay, that he follows through. Here's Jephthah, and that's a tough one. We all know that's a hard one. You know, did it mean that he actually, you know, sacrificed her? Did she actually die, or did it mean something different? You know, the idea that she would remain a virgin the rest of her life, which was next to death for a woman in that era. You know, we're not going to try and resolve that today either. Here's a case though where he felt he had to be true to the vow he made, and he couldn't, whatever that was, he couldn't make an exception to it. Saul's oath. Remember that? Nobody eats honey until we resolve this problem. And guess what? Jonathan hadn't heard it, and he ate honey. And his dad says, God do so, Lord, you shall surely die, Jonathan. But again, I would ask the same question. Was Saul doing that because he was trying to be true to the oath for the oath's sake? Or was it because he was afraid of how his reputation would be tarnished if he didn't? He'd be looked at as a coward or as doing favors for his own family, which could stir up rebellion in the camp. Because his camp is already very unstable. His reign is very, very fragile at this point. Okay? Hi, Pam. Let's see. Hannah's still not here, right? Okay. Okay. All righty. Now look at this. If a man lies sexually with a woman who is a slave assigned to another man and not yet ransomed or given her freedom, a distinction shall be made. Ooh, for slavery, a distinction shall be made. Okay. There are people out there that will bring this up and say, so God is okay with slaves. They didn't have to, if somebody committed adultery, fornication with a slave, they wouldn't suffer the same punishment as somebody who wasn't a slave? That's a tough one. And I'm not going to try to answer that for you today either. I'm just showing you that distinctions do exist at times. Okay? Very interesting. Galatians 6:10. So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, especially to those of the household of faith. The believers have a special responsibility to those who are part of their family. Even in Acts 6, the distribution of tables, goods, I don't see that as something that's being done for the community at large, but it's something to help those who are part of the body who are in need, people in the church itself. See? So there's a distinction there, priority that's made on behalf of those who know Christ when it comes to that sort of thing. All right. So I may have raised more questions, but again, my point today is not to get into all the weeds of those passages, but simply to point out that there were distinctions even in the law of God. It was not always a universal application of everything in every way. Okay? And so it's tough. One of the things that I always come back to in these kinds of discussions is that we live in a broken world. And God knows that. And in a broken world, there are times when you cannot be totally consistent no matter how hard you try. We should always seek consistency, always be loyal to the Word of God. But there are times, case studies, we're doing another class, where total consistency, total black and white, 100% is not always possible. And that's because we live in a broken world. Only God can be truly, totally consistent. All right, we are ready for the next one. Okay? Expressiveness. Woohoo! This is a fun one, especially at 11:15 on a cold, wintry morning. Walking with your faces frozen. I have this coat, you remember the old parkas, and it's got, maybe you don't, the old blue, they had the orange interior and the blue outside, and it has the hood that you can fold out and it goes out into a little tunnel like that. I have one, I've had it since college. So when I go outside, I like to take the dogs out to go to the bathroom or something, I zip that thing right up, and my wife laughs at me because it looks like I'm looking out of a snorkel or something, But it keeps me warm. All right, let's talk about expressiveness here. Okay, so let's get our notes open to the right one. Rules, expressiveness. All right. Dr. Spock, allegedly not a human being, but I think the actor was. All right, let's begin by describing the difference between the reaction of local citizens to Hurricane Katrina and the tsunami in Fukushima, Japan. Actually, I have a clip I'm going to play in just a little bit. I have to pull it up. So I'm going to come back to that in just a moment, so please hang on to that. All right, what do we mean by neutral and effective? One thing, here, let me just get this on here for you. One thing that I want you to pay attention to is this word. It doesn't begin with an E. It's not talking about effects, if something is effective, okay? is talking about affection. So it has to do with the affections, the emotions. Okay, so when you see that word affective, think of people who more freely show emotion, whereas neutral are those that, and the reason it's called neutral is because the idea is you really don't know what the person is thinking because of the poker face. You're not sure what the person is thinking. So that's what the word neutral is designed to communicate. Can't tell. You have a good hand or not, when you're playing Uno, okay? All right. So what do we mean by neutral and affective? Number one there. Culturally speaking, it refers to the way we express emotion, not whether. Please understand what we're not saying in this study here is that there are cultures that don't show emotion. Every human being is an emotional being. There's no way not to express emotion. It's part of who you are. The question is, how do you do it? And how much? All right? Now again, some of this is personality. In this room, let me add, who would say, I generally am the kind of person that just really likes to show my emotion. I have no problem. I tend to be more extrovertish that way. I show, okay, Pam, you're that way. Yeah. Anybody else? That way? Yeah. I tend to be more that way. It's hard for me. People can read me. If I'm having a rotten day, they can usually tell. Okay. So does that mean the rest of you are kind of, I'm a little bit more subdued. I prefer to, maybe. Yeah. And I know it depends on who you're with. If you're with your family, maybe one way. If you're with your roommates, maybe another way. If you're at work, maybe a third way. I get that. Some of that is personality. All right. But there are cultures in the world that are considered to be more neutral or affective on a comparative scale. So, now this is just one I chose, and even looking at this, I'm not sure if I totally agree with this, but it does show at least one, the results of one survey taken among nations, evaluation of nations. So the ones up here are the ones that do not, express emotions overtly. In Japan, in fact, some consider Japan to be at the very top. Okay, again, it depends on who did this. But Japan is very much near the top. China, also closer to the top here. India is so diverse, and so is China for that matter. So, again, it's hard to be. The U.S. is kind of in the middle on this one, right next to the U.K. I expected to see more Latin America at the bottom, but again, I don't know Brazil, I would expect to be down here farther. But if you're talking about South Brazil, which is very European in its orientation, you're going to have a lot less expression than you would up in the Northeast where I lived. We spend half our time laughing up there. They're wonderful people. Here in the notes, we'll see that Italy is actually, by some counts, right down here. It's one of the most expressive, right? So give me just a moment. I want to pull up. I'm going to have to pause the recording. For those of you watching online, I have to do this, and I apologize for it, but if I put the recording in, it may cause a glitch with the transmission of this. So I'm going to put you on pause to show this, and I'll be right back. All right, so for those of you online, it was just a couple of illustrations of the difference between Japanese culture and other cultures that are more affective when dealing with crises, a personal crisis of someone dying, and the reaction of the Japanese to this, have led some to think that they were just living in denial and refusing to grieve and to face it. And we have to be really careful that we don't draw conclusions like that without really understanding the deeper cultural implications there. And then the second one that we watched was just about a guy that he knew that was an African American in a predominantly white business setting. He's the CEO, and he tended to be very loud and booming and gregarious in the way he talked, but in that setting he had to learn to tone it down a little bit because most of the guys he worked with didn't come from that kind of a setting. And while some of his African-American colleagues accused him of selling out to them, he saw it as a culturally intelligent way to deal with the setting in which he was working. And so again, no matter where the Lord takes you, you'll have to make some sort of adjustments, and it's okay to do that. Some people actually would prefer not to serve in a cross-cultural setting because they like who they are and they don't want to have to become something other than that. And I would just say to you that if God takes you to a different cultural setting to serve, rather than thinking of it as being robbed of who you are, think of it as an opportunity to add the richness of that culture to who you are. You see, there are two ways of looking at that. And if you choose to look at it that way, getting the best of both cultures, rather than sacrificing something from your own, I think it'll really affect the way that you approach that. You guys who are here from other cultures, other cultural settings, you understand that. And it's a decision that everybody in a cross-cultural setting has to make. All right, any questions or comments just about those clips or implications of that? Pam? Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Yeah, that is so true. All of us tend to judge people on the basis of what is immediately visible, or audible. And that's why it's so important that we dig deeper and find out what's underlying that. Yeah, I remember in Brazil going to funerals, and especially the ladies, but even sometimes the men would just wail, cry out, in agony. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, come on, stop acting, And I even tended to compare them to cases in the Bible where they would hire mourners to cry out, and they did. They would do that. But these weren't cases where people were hired. These were family members who were actually crying out and wailing. And I thought, this is a little bit over the top, isn't it? But what I didn't realize is that was part of their culture's way of mourning, of dealing with, the death. Whereas in my culture, we're much more, and yet, people, so everybody has to deal with it. And I actually think they had a certain advantage, in a sense, in dealing with it that way, because they were less afraid to let those feelings surface. But that is not to take anything away from those who choose to hold them in. And some people choose to hold them in because they feel, in some cultures, to cry out like that, at a watch night setting, when somebody has died, or at a funeral, is to call attention to the mourner and call attention away from the one they're trying to honor who has passed away. So in some cultures, being silent and being chill, if you will, has more to do with not distracting attention from the one we came to honor. That makes sense? So there are all kinds of ways that this can be interpreted, and we just have to be careful that we don't misinterpret. Anybody else want to comment on that? That's a very good, yeah, Nina? Mm-hmm. There's always a truth foundation to what we do, okay? In other words, regardless of what culture you're in, you have to ask the question, what is the truth claim of the Bible that should evoke a response? But I don't think there's one kind of response that's biblical and one that's not. The tearing of clothes or putting on sackcloth and ashes to mourn, that's very much a cultural thing, okay? I don't think that's the prescription for every culture and every situation where somebody's mourning for a sin or something like that. But I do think that for believers all around the world, whatever your culture is, there should be a common truth that undergirds what you do. So the expression of truth can vary widely from culture to culture. And that's why even like when you go to church, if you're not used to the way that this worship is being done, the volume, or, people, in African churches that are, moving right away, you think, oh, they're showing off, or hold on. Be very careful about making that conclusion. They may look at you and say, these people are absolutely stone dead. They have no spiritual life at all. Would you appreciate that if they said that about you? Of course not, you see? And so we need to be careful that we don't assume that about them as well. So I don't know if that answers your question, but there has to be an undergirding of the truth. But the expression of truth is widely divergent. Yeah. But here's the thing, though. In that, you mean in the Japanese ladies there, when they know that one of them's going to die? Now, I think that's where we have to understand that they're dealing with something, but they're dealing with it more internally. A lot of this has to do with the degree to which expression is internalized or externalized. See, because there has to be a reaction. And these ladies, in fact, it may be that the way these ladies act is part of that indirect communication we talked about, where they're not saying something or making something very overtly stated, but they both are communicating just by the way that they're sharing and being happy and shopping and saying goodbye. They have communicated to each other, you see, in a way that may sound really strange and foreign to us. And part of that communication might be, I don't want to leave you crying. I want to leave you happy with the memory of our time together. When you look back and you remember me after I'm gone, this is what I want you to remember. See, that may be part of it. There's just so much that goes on there that we have to be careful we don't overlook or ignore. Yeah. All right? Anybody else want to comment on these? These are very, very good statements. All right. Okay. Let's move. Is the U.S. effective or neutral? Well, of course, the U.S. is always the country that's got it just right, a perfect balance, right? Well, actually, here's one statement. The U.S. stands between two extremes. Affective cultures, like Latin cultures, in which people express their emotions quite spontaneously, and neutral cultures, for example, some Asian cultures, in which people make great efforts to control or even hide their emotions. On the other hand, Americans frown on highly emotive, irrational expressiveness, but they do thrive on seeing people express warmth and responsiveness when they're talking to people. Now, who's writing this? Is this an American evaluating an American, or is this somebody else from the outside who's looking at the U.S. and saying they're pretty balanced? Which just reminds us all that none of us can be totally objective, right? None of us is going to be completely objective in viewing ourselves and others. Do you remember have we used the terms etic and emic in this class? Let me write them down over here. All right. Some say emic, etic. Now, I know that I've used these terms in, I think, theology admissions, maybe. We may talk about this. This has to do with somebody viewing from the outside and somebody viewing from the inside. Emic has to do with those who are on the inside, okay? In other words, it's the way that you evaluate your own culture. And etic is the way that somebody from the outside evaluates your culture. Now, let me ask you this. Who has the greatest potential of being correct? You evaluating your culture from within, or somebody evaluating your culture from outside? Yeah. Yep. Right. Your struggle to answer is expected. They're both needed. When you're evaluating a culture, you really need an insider's and an outsider's perspective. You have to have both. Why? because we have blind spots. We do things second nature in our own culture. We cannot be totally objective in our own setting. But those outside who are not living here also fail to see certain things. So you put both those together, and you have a better chance of coming up with a good synopsis of your culture than you would with one or the other. Yeah. All right, good. Fascinating. When God confused the languages and spread everybody around, he really did a good job. Neutral cultures may perceive Americans as overly enthusiastic and loud, and they may even sometimes question their ability to make decisions objectively. Affective cultures may perceive Americans as lacking warmth, e.g. respecting personal space is very important in the U.S. Okay, so Pam, you get on an airplane, you go to Peru, okay, and it's full of Americans. Is the plane going to be noisy or going to be quiet? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. And Brazilians. It's a party. Yeah. But now, Americans get on a flight with Japanese, and we're heading to Tokyo. Now who's the quiet bunch? It's the Japanese, and they're irritated by the rude loudness of the Americans on the plane. It's just the opposite, see? And I remember on a flight, I tend to be gregarious when I get in public, and I can't tell you how many times I embarrassed myself and probably the team that was with me in Japan by trying to, be really outgoing and friendly. And it just wasn't the right time to do that or the right way to do it. Yeah, so it's fascinating. Fascinating. Well, I'm not going to give up who I am. Well, do you care about the people you went to visit? Do they mean anything to you in this? Here are a few examples. So here we go. Japan and Italy with the deflated soccer ball. All right. Why they don't blow that thing up, if they're going to be good soccer players. You want to have a good-looking soccer ball, right? So Japan is one of the most culturally neutral countries in the world. Some say it's the most. Korea is also more neutral. A Korean saying, never trust a man who smiles in a photo. Even in Brazil, I think they're changing a little bit now, but when I was teaching down there, and the graduates had their photos taken, because they would do that down there. Every graduate, they'd hold a Bible or something, they'd get a photo taken. It was a big deal. And let's just say this is my Bible right here. Almost all of them would hold it like this. Rarely do you see somebody go to have their picture taken. Okay. Now here in the States, they've changed the driver's license. They used to say, don't smile. I think you can smile now on a driver's license, right? Yeah. And but that was a different reason. The reason they didn't want you to smile is because they wanted, if you got pulled over, you probably weren't going to be smiling, so they wanted your photo to look like your face when you got pulled over. Very different situation. All right. Yeah, if you're smiling in some places, in fact, if you go as an American or as a Latin American and you smile too much in a neutral country, they may have suspicions about you. Why are they smiling? Why they're trying to pull over on me? Why are they warming up to me so quickly? You can actually do more harm than good, thinking you're being friendly and, developing relationships. Italy is one of the most culturally affective countries of the world. Yeah. Very gregarious. Italian people. There's a commercial I'd like to show you guys sometime. It's way back when I was a kid. Mamma mia, that's a spicy meat. Have you ever seen that commercial? That is one of my favorite commercials of all time. Just look it up. The Mamma mia, that's a spicy meatballs like from the 60s or 70s. I think it's funny. Within the United States, don't look it up now, by the way. Within the United States, African Americans would generally be considered affective. Now, again, that's not always the case. Some of it depends on the kind of neighborhood you grow up in, the kind of school you go to, and that sort of thing. But as a general rule, keep in mind that some view not expressing emotion as a way of showing respect, and others view expressing emotion as a way of showing respect. In other words, you can be showing respect both ways, okay? Just like I said at the funeral, by being very calm and quiet, you're showing respect for the person that really is the center of attention here. But in other cultures, to be quiet is to show disrespect. To be mourning is to show you really loved them and cared about them. They were important to you, you see? And we are so quick to misinterpret those cues. Can any of you think of a situation in your life sometime where you didn't know for sure whether you should be one way or the other, really quiet or more? You ever find yourself in a situation like that where you just weren't sure what was the right response? Liz? Okay. So your struggle is to know whether to be overly friendly or underly friendly. Huh? Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. You talking about if you're counseling at camp or just? Okay. Mm-hmm. Right. Some people feel much more comfortable growing into it slowly. You know, by the end of the first couple of days at camp, maybe they're more relaxed, but they don't want to blow it early on, so they're going to be cautious. Yeah. And others do just the opposite. Yeah. Did you have your hand up? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, it's hard sometimes. So, if you're not sure, what is your normal default? In that case, Liz, what was your default? Huh? Okay, yeah. Now, are you normally more of a neutral person or not, or more affective, just in general? Okay. Yeah, it is hard to say. Yep. We always have to remember that all this is very complex. There are a lot of factors influencing what we do. All right, so, yeah. Is more emotion respectful or is less emotion respectful? Yes. Depending. All right, so let's compare neutral. Now, the wording on the slides here is not exactly the same, so I will read what goes in the blanks here. Neutral cultures, number 3, people make a great effort to control their emotions. In a neutral culture, if you just come on over the top, happy, and how you doing? Nice to meet you, give them a hug, and the whole thing, they're looking at you like this person is totally out of control. Whereas the opposite, you meet somebody and you're very cool. What's the response there? This person is socially awkward. This person doesn't want to be here, doesn't like me, So it goes both ways. So you're struggling to figure out, okay, where's the balance here? And sometimes there's not a balance. Sometimes it's just a matter of time. In an affective culture like Latin America, it doesn't take nearly as long to make a friend this thick, this deep. But it takes a lot longer to make a friend this deep. And so, in very neutral cultures, it takes a long time to make a friend even this deep because they're not interested in relationships this thick. They want something deeper. So they will invest from the very beginning for the long haul. And they're not satisfied with doing something that'll work just for today. Okay? Very interesting how that works. So if you meet somebody from a neutral culture that seems to be very uninterested or even resistant to you, just understand that person may be thinking of the long haul. I want this to become something that'll be solid and lasting. So try to think of it that way. Okay, so here we go. Yeah, reason dominates feelings. Letter A, reason in a neutral culture. We are all intellectual, emotional, and volitional creatures. Let's take the first two. Of intellect and emotion, which one should call the shots? In neutral culture, definitely the reason. Number two, speaking tends to be more monotonic. Monotonic. I don't think that's monotonic. Doesn't sound right. We'll say monotonic, which means one tone. So if I speak to you like this, it's probably because I tend to be a little more cautious about expressing my emotions openly when I hardly even know you. Okay? I hate even doing that. Well, China's very tonal language, right? But Chinese people would be probably in general be more neutral. Yeah. So that's a very interesting question. I've never thought of that. The fact that it's a tonal language doesn't imply that it's an affective culture. Right? Would I be right in saying that? Yeah. Japanese. Well, Japanese is a mixture. We had an interesting discussion about that yesterday with Lana. Interesting mixture of kanji from China, right? It's kanji, and the concrete pictorial language, and two Japanese dialects. And what she told us is fascinating. I'm a little off the subject here. You take the Chinese that has come into their language and two Japanese languages, and you pronounce, if you take a word like Bible, all three of those are pronounced exactly the same way. I'm sitting there thinking, huh? But, I mean, it's just a totally different experience. But it's more of a tonal language as well, and yet they would be a highly neutral culture. So apparently, the tonality of the language doesn't apply directly to that question. But that's a really good observation. Yeah, maybe more volume related and consistency. You know, I mean, in Brazil, we took up and down, and we talked down, and then we're back up again, and then we come down like this. Oh, and we're like that, and you know, it becomes very much a volume related thing. Okay, and it had its impact on me. Woohoo! I never got the time part right in Brazil, but I did get the. All right, good question. See, there is often a coolness. Coolness is the word there in the way that people present themselves. Again, it's not intended to be impolite or disrespectful. In fact, it is perceived as just the opposite. I respect you too much to just jump into a relationship superficially. I want this thing to be for real. So I'm going to invest. It's the long-term investment that I'm after. 4, people prefer sticking to the point. Sticking to the point. In neutral cultures, it's not as easy to get off on rabbit trails. You folks from Latin America, when I taught in Brazil, people often ask me, what's the difference between teaching Brazilians and teaching Americans? And there's a lot of similarity. But one of the things that doesn't happen here, that happened every day in the Brazilian classroom, was rabbit trails. Pastor! And they would, you know, it'd be kind of related, but not really. And the next person is even farther away. And the first thing you know, we haven't gotten through any of our notes. And I can't put, man, how am I going to? And what they had to share and talk about was really cool and important and fun and interesting, you know? And yet, I had to, it's like a preacher that, takes a verse, and the next thing you know, he's off in, la la land somewhere in another subject. And what he has to say is really good and important, but it has nothing to do with the context of the verse he's preaching about, And so I often had to tell my students in Brazil, okay, this is the last question. Then we got to give it, just real quick. Okay. And we get through half a page of notes, what am I going to do? So, but that's the way it is, sticking to the point. So if you ever see me not sticking to the point, blame it on Brazil. No, all right. Interruptions are considered rude. To interrupt is very rude. When I'm talking to someone from a neutral culture, I really struggle with this. Because what happens in an affective culture is you don't get a chance to finish your statement. You get to the end and the other person already knows what he wants to say and jumps right in, and it's okay because interruptions aren't a big deal, right? You're gonna make me look bad now, Pam. If I feel like, what? Ask it again. Yeah, in other words, letting somebody say something and then pondering it before responding is very much, there's a lot more intense interaction. And sometimes even, there you go. That's what I was trying to say. Did I see another hand here? Somebody else trying to interrupt me? Okay. All right, here we go. Silence, okay, the long lapses of silence, letter F, are welcome and expected as a sign of respect. So I say something in class, or I ask a question in a neutral environment class, and nobody responds. And, and I'm thinking, okay, did they understand the question? Maybe they don't care about the question. Maybe they just want to go home. Maybe they don't like me. They're thinking about something I said earlier that bothered them. And all of those could be equally wrong. What they're doing is they're showing respect because in their mind, to answer immediately is to take lightly the question. But to stop and think about it shows me that they're taking the question seriously. Dr. Mark Stupka is really good at that. When I talk to Dr. Stupka, I appreciate this about him. I'll ask something and he'll say, yes. He ponders it, and he always gives me the impression that he takes seriously what I'm asking him about. And I appreciate that. And so that's part of it. All right, well, let's go to the neutral culture, or affective rather. People look for ways to express their emotions, even spontaneously. Because it's okay. I'm trying to get to know you, I'm trying to break the ice, get you to come out of yourself. All right, expressions then, A, are more immediate and open. Expressions are more immediate and open. Can be good, can be bad. B, lack of expression is seen as being cold, in denial, or insecure. Okay. If I'm in Latin America, if I'm in Brazil and they ask me something and I'm kind of hesitating, they might think, oh, we made him nervous. He's unsure of himself. Pam? Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, I feel your pain, Pam. I really do. People in affective cultures tend to be more vulnerable. They're okay with just blurting it out, and then whatever happens, happens. Whereas in a neutral culture, I don't like that vulnerability. I want to take time to really think carefully about what I'm going to say. You all know people like that on both sides of the fence, right? Yeah. And let's face it, if you're an affective cultural kind of a person, you're going to stick your foot in your mouth occasionally with a capital O. It just happens. And And I have to be careful of that in the classroom or in the pulpit because, you can't take back what you said. But if people get to know you and they understand that you're more of a spontaneous person, they learn to live with it. It's when you're a visiting preacher. They don't know you from Adam and you say something stupid, which I have done. You don't have another chance. You get to know me and you'll understand. All right, C. There is a wide range of facial, hand, and other physical gestures. And we talked about gestures the other day. How many of you would be absolutely mortified if you had to hold your hands behind you the entire time you were giving a lesson or a study or something? Yeah, Pam? You got to use the hands. Yeah. Are you that way? You like to use your hands more, or do you like... How about you? You got to keep your hands on that wheel, man. Interesting. Yeah. Joel Stoll III was the president of Moody Bible Institute for several years. His dad was one of the original national representatives of the GRBC. Okay, his name was Joel Stoll II, I think. And I remember him. He was a good preacher, but he preached like this from the pulpit, and he never moved. He was good. You could sit and listen to him for 45 minutes because he was a very eloquent preacher. But this is the way he preached. You know? It drives me nuts. You ever hear of restless leg syndrome? Restless arm syndrome? I agree. All right. Next one, D. Talk is louder and debate is welcome. Now, careful with this debate is welcome because Germans tend to be very neutral and culturally, and yet they love a good, healthy debate. So it's not always, everybody over here, and they love debate, a very good, rational argument. But if they're going to debate, they want it to be done on rational terms. That's the difference. If the debate becomes emotional, who speaks the loudest and the most, they're out. They don't want that. But they love to debate if it's done rationally. Okay. But Brazilians, Latin Americans, and others, Africans by and large, tend to welcome that early on, even when they don't know you that well. They're okay with exchanging. What do you think about this? Well, I hardly know you. Well, it doesn't matter. Is he? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then when you do give your opinion, they'll say, "Hey, did you hear what he said? He agrees with me." Yeah, no. And you're brand new to the group, You think, what am I getting into? Yeah, I know. That's what it's. Yeah. It's a ride. It's a ride. Next. Spontaneity is the word there, letter E. Spontaneity. E-I-T-Y. Spontaneity is considered part of the process of making conversation. What good is a conversation if it's, too highly calculated? Do you prefer to ride on the at the park, you prefer the roller coaster ride, or do you prefer to ride the cars that stay in the same level most of the time, Next one, emotions and intuitions are important in the decision-making process, decision-making. There are some cultures that have a hard time making decisions without getting emotionally involved. They feel like if this decision is worth something, then it's worth getting excited about. Whereas other cultures say, if this decision is worth making, it needs to be done rationally. We need to leave the emotions at a minimum. And both of them have something to say. There's truth in both of those statements. So what is the perfectly balanced culture? I don't think it exists. All right. And G, exaggeration is permitted to make a point. Did Jesus ever exaggerate when he talked? Or is exaggeration a form of a lie? We would never accuse Jesus of lying, but did he ever exaggerate? You strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. Really? Did he really swallow? Did you ever see somebody swallow a camel? I'd like to see that sometime. He was exaggerating. So was he lying? Oh, ain't nobody going to say he was lying, right? So what do you do with that, Val? All right, that's a very good point. Jesus is not being deceptive. He's using a rhetorical device that's accepted and understood by the people. We all do it. Raining cats and dogs out there, or snowing. It depends on the day, right? And so it's a rhetorical device that God himself, uses that and in speaking to his people. Yeah, Jesus calls those same Pharisees whitewashed tombs, So, but the key word that you said was deceit. If you're purposely using exaggeration to deceive somebody, then you're wrong. And Jesus never did that. Okay? Good. Well done. So exaggeration is encouraged. It's not always, sometimes it is deceitful, but all right, let's talk about the 7 universal devotions. This is fun. Anger. Now, by the way, you can think of other emotions, and you might even substitute some for some of these. I got this from a study that was done, and so, it's subject to modification. Contempt. Whoop, did we miss something there, Graceland? Oh, picky. All right. The U.S. leans toward, what would you think, affection or neutral? That's a tough one. Yeah, it depends. The word that the general opinion is affection. But again, that depends on where you're from, what the issue is. But just trying to look globally, Americans usually do like to express the way they feel. We show off our flags and our patriotism, but yeah, so it's in general, but that one can be debated. Rationally, of course. All right. So, yeah, letter A is 7 universal emotions. Give me another one. What's a universal emotion? Sadness. Yeah, that's number 6. Roman numeral 6 down there, second from the bottom. Sadness. What's another one? Fear. That's number 4. No, because love can be expressed in both ways. And love is not considered primarily an emotion. It can be by some, but yeah. And again, you could add it, but that's not one of these. Yeah, the last one is surprise. How do you respond to surprise? Is or is it? Let's see. Number 5 is joy. Let me give them to you here. There they are. And disgust. Now, you might say anger and disgust or contempt sound a lot alike, and they kind of do. So, again, this is just to get you thinking. If you want to come up with your own, you can. But all of those exist in some way in a culture. All right. So, is facial expression transcultural? In other words, is a facial expression in the U.S. the same as communicating the same thing as that same expression in Korea? All right, let's talk about micro expressions. Thailand claims it has the fame of being the most diversely expressive country on earth. Did you know that? Well, if you didn't, you should. This picture was taken. Yeah, this was over at Nettleton, and they had the whole wall there covered with sticky notes. Yeah, you remember that? So you're in high school? Okay. And I got permission from your sister, I think. Is that okay? Did I get yours by? Yeah, okay. So it's fun to try and imitate these. I'm so happy, I'm crying smile, the polite smile for someone you barely know, the I admire you smile, the stiff smile, also known as the I should laugh at that joke, though it's not funny. I get that one lots. The smile that masks the wickedness in your mind, the teasing or I told you so smile, the I know things pretty bad, but I know things look pretty bad, but there's no point in crying over spilled milk smile, the sad smile, the dry smile, also known as the I know I owe you the money, but I don't have it smile, the I disagree with you smile, also known as the you can go ahead and propose, but it's your idea, but your idea is no good smile, the I am the winner smile, smile given to a losing competitor, the smiling in the face of an impossible struggle smile, or the I'm trying to smile but can't smile. Now, in fairness, some of these smiles only get their meaning with additional gestures. Like, kind of if I go like this, or if I go, I just said something else. So some of these really need more than just the smile to really say what you wanted to say, right? Yeah. So anyway, I don't know why Thailand has that reputation, do you? Yeah. So which kind of smile is she giving us right now? It's so much fun. I love it. All right, so here we go. Let's talk about micro expressions. That's number one, micro expression. You already get that? Number two, the best way to detect lying. Now, again, this is probably very, very elementary, but a couple of things you can look for. If you want to detect lying, look for a change in behavior. If somebody just radically all of a sudden changes the way he or she is acting, you know, there could be lying going on. Compare behavior with the norm for their cultural group. If somebody within that group is acting very differently from other people in the same cultural group, you might say, what's going on here? I had a friend when I was talking to a guy in my office several years ago who used to work for, I think he worked for immigration. And he was highly trained to detect lying from people coming through immigration. I always hate that, our customs, they ask, do you have anything in this bag that's, and the people had to respond. And there were, I forget, a whole bucket full of things they'd learned to look for. They studied different muscles in the forehead and in the cheeks to watch for certain movements that could detect things. And he said, now, in order not to scare you, he said, we've been trained that just because you see one of those doesn't mean the person's lying. Usually, it's a combination of several things going on in the face that confirm whether the person's lying. In fact, maybe you've heard this before. If you talk to someone, you ask a question, and that person answers by looking up to the upper left, they may be lying to you. Now, don't just run with that, okay? It may be that they're just nervous and they don't want to look at you, But I found myself doing that. Somebody asks a question, and I answer like this, and I think, oops. So he said, it's a combination of those things. So, it's not just one or the other. And my son and I were on our way back from India, and we went through security, and we went down to our gate, only to discover that gate was now transformed into another security check area. I thought, what's going on here? Why are we doing another security check? And we had just finished ministering in India, and my son and I did the speaking, and he had a full beard, okay? And the lady asked, so do you have checked baggage? I said, no, just our carry-ons. She asked another question, and I said, just a minute. She walked away, and she went and talked to another guy, and he came back and started asking questions. And Steve and I are thinking, what's going on? And finally, this is in Amsterdam, and I wasn't sure in Amsterdam what I should say. Finally, I said, I'm from a small Bible college where we were down ministering to a group of pastors. Oh, so it's religious work you're doing? I said, uh-huh. Oh, okay. And that was it. And I thought, whoa, that's weird. But apparently, and Stephen said later he thought it was because of his beard, you know. he looked, and because we didn't have any check-in baggage, sometimes that's an issue too, you know, if they're gonna. So I felt really nervous about that, but apparently there was something in the way we responded that gave maybe something in the muscle movement. It gave them reason to think this isn't quite right. All right, really quick, got to be done. All right, let's do this fast. Okay, is my expression discernible? Okay, so how much do I allow? This is not in the notes. How much do I allow others to know what I'm thinking and feeling? How much of this is personality and how much of it's culture? Even non-expression is expression. Okay, here we go. Saving face versus giving face, A and B. Saving face and giving face. In many cultures, it's all about the face. And giving face means the same thing as giving somebody a reputation. Okay, so boring or boisterous? Let me skip that. All right, oh, okay. You know something? It's 12:15. I'm very time conscious. We're going to come back and finish this later. We'll finish filling this in on Thursday. I got a little too emotional and time slipped by. Thank you very much.